Hello everyone, and thanks for attending today's webcast. It's going to be on Civil 3D feature line labels, some tips and tricks surrounding that. I'm Brian Lewandowski. I'm one of our application engineers and our support manager here at CTC. So let's jump into it from here. And by the way, I will, if there's time, take some questions, put them right into the chat tool on there. I'll address them if there's time. Otherwise, I'll respond after the webcast. And as always, feel free and please fill out your evaluations after the fact. All right, so feature line labels. What do we use these for? What do we care about these for? This is in situations where we've got sites and ponds or residential lot grading, any kind of general grading like that, where we're manipulating feature lines for grading whatever our design is. And one of the things we're after is to be able to, at a glance, see what our grading is set up as. You know, I want to be able to see what the slope is or the end elevation is of a given feature line. So we want labels that give us that kind of instant feedback, kind of like what we see on the right here in the picture. And we want automatic placement. I don't want a whole lot of manual placement of these labels. I want to just kind of assign them all at once to a set of feature lines and then move on with my design. And we certainly don't want any busy work, any drafting busy work if we're using some of these in planned production. So these may be used, like I said, for planned production or just in an aid to help you while you design. And so what we're going to look at, we're going to build primarily one feature line style, incorporating a number of different things and showing a number of different tricks. But what we're going to be after is showing the elevations at vertices, at the ends, and along our feature lines. Then we also want the grades and flow direction arrows to show up as well. And we want this to work for not just lines, but also curves. And so we get into some tricks with expressions and hidden label style components to get some of that stuff to work. So that's what we're after. I'm going to jump into Civil 3D and show you what we've got here. So we're going to start a little more introductory and get a little more advanced towards the end of it. I've got about a half hour here. I may run a little over just to make sure I can cover all the stuff I want to, but that's the goal here. So the scenario we have here is a set of feature lines. The yellow ones are a set of feature lines I'm using to grade a parking lot, and I want to be able to manipulate these feature lines and have labels that constantly update and reflect what I have here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with assigning a feature line label to some of the feature lines we have, and then continue to manipulate that. So I'm going to come right up here to labels, go to feature lines, and add feature line labels, and I get my little floating toolbar here. And what feature line labels are, they're not actually a unique label type. They're just the line and curve labels. But in those labels, we have options for not just things like bearing and distance, but also grade and elevation. So if I start right out here and I go to multiple segment, and let's just grab some of the out-of-the-box ones here. Grade only for the lines and grade only for the curves. And if I go ahead and pick this feature line here, now this is one that's a closed feature line. It goes all the way around. It's going to attach grade labels along every segment of that feature line. And these work as expected. If I pick a feature line and I'm manipulating grades on here, right, those labels update. So that works pretty well. But let's look at getting spot elevation grades on here. And then also, how do we do it when we have curves in there? That's where some of the out-of-the-box labels don't quite work for what we're after. So to start with, I want the elevation at the endpoints to show up. Now here's the thing. We can take this particular label style and we can have it labeled at end vertice and the start vertice of that segment. But if we do the same thing and we have the same label style up here, it's also going to label its start vertice, which is the same vertice or vertex as this one here. So we have to have these label styles be able to kind of work together. So let's start by going into this line label style and editing this. Right off the bat, we'll call it grade and elevation, because that's what we're after. And I go to the Layout tab, and I already have a grade component in here, and I have an arrow component, and those are just out of the box. So I'm going to add another component, and we'll call this one elevation start. And so this is all pretty basic label style creation. I'm going to attach this to the feature. I'm going to attach it to the start of the feature. Then I need to go in the contents, and what the contents is going to be is this general segment start Z, so that's the elevation. And I can put that component in there, hit OK, and if I hit apply, right away I'll see those labels showing up, and it's just kind of the default position. So now I can come in and do things like 45 degrees, 45 degree rotation, and perhaps a middle left for an attachment point. Starting to look a little better. You can do a couple little offsets on there, get it a little bit further away from the corner there. Okay, so those look pretty decent. We like the appearance of that. We got to also copy this, and we have to make elevation end. And this one's going to attach to the end of the segment. And of course we have to change the component here to general segment end Z. Okay? And if I hit apply, you see it's now labeling those ends. And if you see these two elevations here, it's actually labeling, it's reading the same number, right? But it's coming from two separate label objects. And so here's where it gets a little tricky. We've got the orientation of this based on the bearing or the direction of that given segment. So what we have to do is we have to come over here and we have to tell the orientation reference to be based on our view. So then 45 degrees will always be based on our overall view over here and not the orientation of the object. If I hit apply, what we'll now see, if I hit OK, is two text components landing right on top of each other. And that's fine, because they'll update together. So if I pick my feature line now and we do a quick elevation edit on it, I change this from -2% to a -1%, you'll see those elevations changing. Now those text components are right on top of each other, but it works for what we're after. But what that setting, that object orientation has done is it's kind of screwed up our grade label in here. So we need to go back in there and fix that. And so here's the thing, the orientation reference, you don't get to set this for a single component, it's for the entire label style. And by the way, while we're putting all this in one label style, it's because we want it to be very easy to drop these label styles on here. In one click, you saw I put all these label styles on here at once. I don't want to have to add a lot of label styles. I want to just boom, add it all on there at once, and then we can move forward. So for example, I can add them right here as well. These are feature lines running across the middle here. And you can't even quite tell, but it's the same label style, and it's putting those elevation labels at the same spot. But they're right on top of the other one. So it behaves like it's just one single piece of text there. Works out pretty nice. All right, let's address this grade here. And if I come in here and I look at some of the other components, I can look at my grade component. That's the % grade right there. And right now this is just attaching to the anchor component of label location. We need this to be based on the orientation of that arrow. So I'll first go to my arrow component, tell it to not attach to the anchor component of the grade. That's the grade component. We want to instead go right to the feature and then go to the middle of the feature. If I hit apply, that'll then attach there. Okay? So that arrow is smart enough to know the orientation or the direction or the bearing of that straight segment. When we get into the arcs or the curves, it's not smart enough to know that, so we're going to have to introduce a different trick there. But with the lines, it rotates okay. So now we can just simply go back to the grade component, that's the text itself, 2%, and tell it to attach to the arrow. And if I hit apply, now we can see its rotation is now being based on the arrow itself. Now we just have some simple manipulation to do here. We don't want the start of the arrow, we want the middle of the arrow. I can hit apply. Part of the reason this is upside down here is our plan readability is set to 110. I tend to prefer 100 degrees. And it's still not quite rotating, but if I grab this thing and move it just slightly more past that 100 degrees, you'll see that it flips. So whatever your drafting preference is there, you can set that plan readability. And so there it is. There's our line labels. Pretty straightforward. The arrow will read the orientation or the bearing of the line segment, and then we attach the percent grade segment to that. And I can come in here and manipulate this a little bit. Perhaps the length of the arrow should be a little longer. Get that longer like that. I can play with the offsets, whatever I want if I don't like the way that looks. And now whatever I do with my feature line, whatever happens to it, those elevations move right with it. As I change grades on it, it changes as well. And the arrow, so the point here is it's about flow direction. The arrow is pointing downhill. That's the way the water is flowing. So if I take my quick elevation edit and hover here and I have the little green arrow go down that way, I can go down at a -2%, and what we should see is that arrow will flip. Okay. So this is actually based on an expression that's in the out-of-the-box label styles, and I'll just take a quick peek at that just so you're aware of what's happening there. If I go to the arrow and I look at the rotation angle of it, it's actually set to an expression, and this expression is called grade check. So expressions are ways you take variables and manipulate them a certain way, and then you can label those expressions instead of the standard variables themselves. So if we go look at that expression, go under General, Label Styles, Line, and then Expressions, here's my grade check. And if I take a look at it, it's a very simple expression. It says if the general segment grade, 2%, is less than 0, meaning is it a negative grade, rotation equals 0. If it's not, pi, or 180 degrees. Pi is 180 degrees in radians. So this is either returning 0 or 180 degrees. And we're using that expression right inside our label style for rotation of the arrow. So that's how the arrow can flip back and forth. And you don't have to do any work on that. They just come out of the box that way. All right, let's move on. Straight segments are fairly simple. What about when we get into curved segments? It gets a little trickier. Let's actually put a label on this curved segment right here. Drop my scale down a little bit as it's getting a little tighter in here. And now what we're after is getting those same kind of curves to behave the way we want. And in fact, let me make this a little bit simpler. We're going to come out here, just do a basic polyline. Perhaps this represents a ditch or something. We've got an arc on it right there. And let's turn this into a feature line. And we'll give it an elevation. We'll start at 850. Okay. Put some different grades on it. We'll go down at a -5 and then down at a -5% there as well. Okay, let's label this. So again, I'm using the grade and elevation line label style I have here and the curve label style of the out-of-the-box ones. Now let's attach this onto here, and then those grades as well as the spot elevation show up. So let me move this off to the side here. So we got a single straight segment and a single arc segment. And here's the deal. When we were over here, we had an arc between two straight segments. So it was labeling the vertices, right, the endpoints there. But those were coming from the line label itself. We're going to run into cases where we don't have another tangent connecting. We might have two arcs, or the arc ends right there, and we need it to label that as well. So to do that, that has to come from the curve label. And right now, the curve label is only labeling grade. So let's look at building that curve label to behave the same way the line label does, where it labels the start and the end segment spot elevations. So I'm going to edit this label style, and again we're going to call it grade and elevation. I'm going to go to the layout tab. I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker this time because it's the same components where we added elevation start, and this is going to attach to the start of the segment, and then we're going to go and grab segment start Z. Okay. Rotation angle will again be 45 degrees and a middle left for attachment. If I hit apply, you'll see that starting to show up here. Now we haven't changed our view orientation yet, but we'll get there in a second. So let me go ahead and copy this component. This one will be called elevation end. This will label segment NZ, and its attachment point will be at the end of the segment. If I hit apply, now that shows up. Now of course, we don't want a label showing up like this, so we have to go and do this orientation reference. I have to set this to view. If I hit apply, now those labels stack on top of each other. Let's make sure we go in here and give ourselves similar offsets so the text lines up right here. So do the same for the start and the elevate and the end. And now they're landing right on top of each other. Alright, now let's look at that grade. Here's where it gets a little tricky. For whatever reason, along a curve, the arrow segment, the arrow component won't find like the chord bearing, or the direction of the curve or the bearing of the curve, because it's, well, for one, it's constantly changing, but it won't even read the chord, the bearing of the chord, and follow that. So we have to find some way so that looks decent, so the arrow points downhill, right? Because we want those arrows to be showing flow direction. So, and one of the other thing I find with this out-of-the-box style is a lot of times the reference to the grade check expression is broken, so you need to kind of reload that, but that's not going to fix it for us. It'll make it flip back and forth when we change this grade. So if I come in here, instead of doing a -5, I do a +4%, the arrow will flip directions, but it's not oriented to the curve itself. So how do you make this rotate along the curve? Here's where it gets a little fun. We have to generate some kind of component that's going to give us an orientation. And in Civil 3D labels, you can create line components, all sorts of components that you use for positioning and placement. But it doesn't necessarily mean you display them. So they give you this option for visibility, true or false. So what I'm going to do is make a line component, and I just went up to this tool right here, line component, and we'll call this grade angle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this to the center. That's the center of the arc for a start anchor point, and the end anchor point will be the feature, and it'll be the middle of it. So let me hit apply, and what you'll see is it drew a line from the center of that arc to the midpoint of that arc. Okay, that's an orientation we have there. We basically want to be rotated 90 degrees from that. So now we can use the angle of that thing to dictate the angle of the arrow as well as the grade text. So let's go to the grade text. This time the anchor component, instead of the feature, we're going to attach it to the grade angle. That's this line out here. And we're going to attach it to the end of it. So the start of it was over here, the end of it was down here. So if I hit apply right away you can always see now its orientation is somehow based on that line. And I can go to my rotation angle. I can just say 90 degrees. And now it's rotating like that. And let's go top center. And then it's just kind of a matter of playing with our offsets a little bit to get this to look the way we want. So let me do this. Let me zoom in a little tighter here and show you how this will come together. So again, back to the grade component, attaching to the grade angle line segment. Rotation angle is 90. We want 0 for Y offset and an X offset of, we'll try 0.04. Okay. So that's sitting off my curve pretty well. I can now go to my arrow component, tell it to attach to the grade component. It already is. We'll go to the top center of it. And we can increase the block size a little bit if we want. We can play with the offsets a little bit. Let me get it a little bit further off the line there. Now what about that line? We don't want that line. Well, like I said, grade angle, visibility, set it to false. Hit OK. That line disappears. Now this feature line, anything that happens to it, any grades that are manipulated, that curve label just sticks right with it. And more importantly, see if I set it up right here. Right now this grade is, we're at 846.53, and we're going up to an 847.9. Okay, so my arrow is backwards right now. It's pointing uphill. So I've got to go back in there. If I go to my arrow component, tell it to attach to the bottom center. No, not that. Top center. I know what we're after. We want to go to our grade component, my text here. So the orientation of that arrow, we've just got it flipped backwards. And so instead of the grade component rotating at 90 degrees, let's go 270 degrees. And now you saw that arrow flip around. And now it's just a matter of playing with these values once again, these offset values, to get it to sit where we want it to. Now we can let it go on the inside this time. Whatever your preference is there, you can kind of push and pull it around. Okay, now 846.53, 847.9, the arrow is pointing down. If I grab my quick elevation edit tool and I instead go down at a -2%, you'll see that arrow flip and show me that flow direction. Alright, so why do we have all these label styles work like this? So that we can real easily just drop them in all at once. So if you've got this stuff set up and ready to go, and you have your set of feature lines, I can very easily grab my styles, hit add, and label everything I need to right at once. And it looks the way I expect. So you can use these, get some goofy feature line stuff there, but you can use these for plan production, or you can just use them for while you're designing, while you're modeling things, to understand what's going on. It's real tedious, in my opinion, to be picking the feature line, and definitely to go into quick elevation editor and understand what your slopes are. Okay, that's real slow and real tedious. It's still slow to go to quick elevation edit and have to come and check this all the time. You know, to come over here and hover over it. We could put slope elevations, slope labels on our surface, but many times what we're after is we want to know the exact grade along the break line, the ridge, the curb line, the top or toe of slope, whatever feature it is I'm grading. I want to know that exact slope. So we want the labels right on the feature line. So you can use these for plan production, all sorts of things. This one I built here had the spot elevations at the end, but you could very well do it without the spot elevations, just do the slopes and so forth. So I'll add one other thing here. This is a kind of a common trick a lot of folks should be aware of. It's truncating your labels here. So a lot of times people label their spot elevations without the hundredths place. You know, they want to just, instead of it saying 808.85, we just want it to say 885 or something like that. So I'm going to bring this up where we have whole numbers for all of these values here. Okay, and let's say we want to truncate. I mean, there's different things we could do. Let's truncate and just drop the hundredths place. And so if you're not familiar with this, it's a fairly simple thing to do here. And I'm just going to do it for one of these components. And so this piece right here. And so you can do this in spot elevation labels. You can also do it in feature line labels like this. So let's come down here and let's come to our expressions. Let's make a new expression. And what we want to do, we want to call it truncate elevation. And I can put in an expression called truncate. And what we want to reference is the grade segment start Z. We want to divide that by 100, and then outside of the truncate expression we want to multiply by 100. Okay? And then we come back into our line label style, and instead of referencing just that general segment start Z, I can instead reference truncate elevation. So this is for the start. We'll go to a hundredths place. And okay, so now I'm referencing that truncated elevation. And I have it on the opposite one here. I think I did my truncation backwards. Let me go back into my expression. Truncate elevation. I think we want to multiply by 100. And then divide by 100. So if you kind of look into the detail of that expression, what it'll do, it's multiplying by a bunch, and then, oh, I'm sorry, I know what I forgot. I have to take general segment start Z and subtract that truncation. I think I got that right. So you can look at these formulas in detail after the fact. There it is, 33.47. So it's dropping the 8 off of there. The actual elevation of that feature line, you can see right there, 833.47. Okay, so you can do that trick with surface spot elevations. You can also do it in these feature line labels. So there's a couple blogs out there that talk about that truncating of surface elevations or vertice elevations. You can get it from there, or watch this video. You can see that expression in detail there. So